Thank you. I would like to thank History Nebraska for inviting me to speak about my book to you all tonight. So also thank you for coming. I am a Nebraskan. My mother's from Lincoln, the Raymond family. My father was from the Sandhills, little town of Bassett. I was up there last week doing a signing at their public library. Sold 40 books. The Raymond, if you're coming over Westo, if you're headed east on Westo, there's a brick building on your right, which will say Raymond Brothers Groceries. That's the Raymond family that my mother comes out. So, I'm a local guy, come home to talk to y'all. Oh, I did get one criticism when I called myself a Nebraska. I'm going to just let this out right now because it was kind of embarrassing. In the book, how many people have read the book? You guys know a lot, huh? If you recall in there, I'm talking about what's happened in Nebraska at the end, kind of doing a wrap up on them. And I mentioned the 3 Heisman Trophy winners. I got this email from a guy. He said, I love your book. It's good. It's this and it's good on that. And he said, but I can't believe you call yourself a Nebraskan and you still don't know how to spell Johnny Rogers' name. I didn't have the D in it. Remember that? And I remembered it as soon as I read it. I think I was a kid at the time, but I remember, they were beaten up on the national press because they never would put that D. So, but I don't want to sit here. I believe it would change the paperback. So basically what I'd like to do today is talk about what happened, what the crime spree was. I'll keep it, just most of you read the book, I'll keep it abbreviated. I won't go into all the details I would normally go into to people who don't know the story, but I need to do it to some extent to set up the themes. The centerpiece of the book, as you know, is the guilt or innocence of Carol Fugate. It's okay.
Just the cost of control.
Joining us right now is Jim MacArthur and his wife Margie. Jim MacArthur was represented, he and his father represented Carol Fugate. Okay, then after we deal briefly with the issue of Carol's guilt or death, be the impact on the culture of the crime itself, which turns out to be one of the more commanding themes that people pick up on, and how we got to where we are today. One of the major themes is, the way my editor said it was, when you're looking at the latest mall shooting or church shooting or King Soopers shooting, and you ask yourself where this all started. It started in January 1958. I'll make the case for that. It's my theory, okay? It's my philosophy, and I can back it up. Doesn't mean it's the truth. Nothing I say factually in terms of Carol's guilt or innocence. That's my analysis. That's my take. I can be persuasive. Other people can see it other ways. So, why did I write this book? I talked to Jim MacArthur years ago about writing a book on Starkweather since I had grown up here, and backed away from it at the time, kind of walked up again later, backed away from it. Finally, the pardon came up, and I was in Florida writing a book that had a Starkweather theme in it. There's a little article saying that the pardon had been denied, and I thought, well, that's curious, because I don't remember any in-depth discussion of Carol's guilt or innocence. It always seemed to me to be kind of assumed in everything I read and watched. And so I watched her on a current affair, and she, a certain line came out that we're quoting from Springfield Springsteen's song, and she broke into tears. It was very dramatic. And I said, that woman either is innocent or she's an incredible actress, or she's got herself convinced. And that was the way I finally got into the book, was coming at it as a former judge, as a labor arbitrator. Let's take a hard look at the guilt the way we would look at anybody else. Leave the drama, leave the facts, leave the trauma out of it. What do the facts show us? And bring my skills as a neutral to bear on that. That was how I eventually got into it. So it expanded into this broader range of issues that I talked about. And when I started, just for the record, I was completely neutral. I could have gone either way. For me, it's a good story, good book, either way, guilty or innocence. So I came with no bias toward either end, either conclusion. So probably one of the most challenging aspects of this, and I won't spend much time on it, was place. To speak as an author for a minute, you've got place, you've got character, and you've got plot, right? All three of those things exist in every story. If they don't, they by and large don't work. Place, Lincoln, 1958. I was here. I loved recreating it, trying to give the 42-year-old millennial a feel for what Lincoln was like in 1958. I went to Prescott, and then I went to Irving Junior High, trying to make them feel it. If they didn't feel it, if they didn't see it, if they couldn't touch it, they wouldn't understand the impact that it had on the town, and had on the state, and had on the country when it happened. So I spent some time on that in an introduction, as you remember, and I go into the simplicity of life at that time. It's often characterized as though that's a dream. The 50s really weren't that way. For white middle America, they were that way, at least for me in Lincoln on South 24th Street. You could smoke on an airplane. There were no, doctor's offices had ashtrays in them. There was no seatbelts in cars. The big impact was the economic impact. The war was over. It had been won. We had the strongest army, the strongest economy the world had ever seen. The vets were now out of college. They'd come back through the Vets Education Act. They were coming to cities. We had suburbs starting as a result. 2-car garages, more education. Still, it was still hooked into that belief that life was safe and stable if you played it right. If you worked hard, if you went to church, if you took care of your parents, if you mowed your lawn, all that was going to lead you to the desired end, which was a decent life. Evil was not something that came unexpectedly. You saw it. Killings were not random. They were usually as a result of some animosity or some antagonism or some grudge or robbery or theft. 85% of killings were done in 1958. They were domestic killings. The idea of a random killing was not part of the culture, not part of the modern American culture. If you go back 50, 60 years, you'll find some, but it was not part of the modern American culture that death could come randomly at you for no reason. That was the setup of the trauma. And the lack of safety that resulted from the fact that you could be killed, your kids could be killed, you could be in your garage right now. That's what set up the fear in that 8-day rampage that he went on. The world was no longer a safe place, even if you lived it right and played by the rules. You could still go down and not get back up. So what happened? I'll go through it briefly. Charlie, 19 years old, third member of a 7-child family, 5'4", bow-legged, spoke with a lisp, didn't see well, met Carol when he was 17 years old. He was mocked mercilessly through school, at Sunday school, in playgrounds, in day school. It was relentless. And this isn't something that I'm repeating from stuff I've read. I've talked to people who were there when they saw this happen after Sunday school. He would be mocked about his legs and his hair. So that's Charlie. And of course, there's a shift in his personality when he comes home one day, and the students have torn this painting out of his hands, painting of his mother that he made for his mother, and ripped it up, and he comes home and is crying. And his dad says, "What, did it happen again?" He said, "Yeah." And he says, "If it happens again, knock the devil out of him." And he did. That's what he started doing. Days after that, he would, you know the story. It got worse and it got worse and it got worse. And he was picking fights with people twice his size and beating him up or getting beat up. It didn't really make any difference. So that's a kind of setup for Charlie. Carol, 12 when she met Charlie, 14 at the time of the rampage, January 1958. Came from a violent household. Her dad was a twice convicted pedophile, alcoholic, never held a job, beat the mother up. No evidence that he beat the children up or abused them, but that doesn't mean he didn't. It just means I never saw any evidence of it. Finally, she went to 6 schools in 5 years. So you're setting up a very unstable personality. Not being able to attach to anybody, moving constantly. And when they meet, Charlie senses this vulnerability in her, whether it's conscious or not, I don't know, and begins his process of basically taking over her personality. The rampage, so they've been going together about a year and a half in January 1958. The rampage starts on Tuesday, January 21st, when Charlie murders her mother, her stepfather, and her little sister. The issue here is, and this has been glossed over in so many tellings of the story, Carol was there. Of course she was there. What do you base that on? Well, they were together. It's like you don't get much of an answer. But that's the assumption out there, is that she was there. If she was there, the story goes down this track. If she was not there, it goes down this track. It's an absolutely critical fact. You cannot assume it and understand what happened afterwards in any logical, realistic fashion. You have to decide that. And I decided that she wasn't there. And I won't go through the analysis. It's in the book. I stand by it. It just does not make sense. Forget her explanation of what happened, forget her rationalization, her story. It doesn't make sense logically that she was there when Charlie killed her mother and her father, and her stepfather and her sister. It just doesn't hang together, and I make that case for it. Of course, if she wasn't there, then that sets up the hostage defense, right? If she was there, the hostage defense is a joke, and she's also a monster. If she was there, if she saw this happen and lived in the same house and watched TV for the next 5 days after Charlie murdered her little sister, what does that make her as a human being? So the hostage defense kind of gets her in trouble because it's not kind of totally believable on its face. Charlie says, I've got your parents, my gang's got them. If you try and run away, I'm gonna kill him. You have to look at the fact that it's a 14-year-old girl. Charlie has a gun in her face. They both say that. So that's what she claims, is that I was a hostage. I didn't know they were dead. If she knew they were dead, then she had to run, right? She had no reason not to run. Where Carol gets convicted in the court of public opinion is that she didn't run when she had the chance to. Carol admits that. If you look at her testimony, time and again, she'll say, yes, I could have left here, I could have left here, I could have left here, and didn't. She has an explanation for it, but those are, that kind of takes the guts out of the hostage defense. If you could have run and you did, there's an explanation for why she didn't run. But going through the killings briefly, it starts on the 21st, Tuesday. They stay there for 5 days. People, and the bodies are out in the back, of course. People come to the door, a range of people. Charlie's older brother, her grandmother, 2 police. That was one why she didn't tell the police that Charlie was in there and had a gun. That was one opportunity she did not take advantage of. Neighbors came, people from the dad's work came, and she gave excuses as to why they couldn't come in anyway. That fell apart the next Monday when the grandmother decided she'd had enough of this and she wanted to see her daughter, and went there and threatened that she was going to come back with the police and a warrant. Charlie decides then that it's time to go. He takes off. The cops come to the house, look through it, don't find anything, right? The evidence is everywhere. And I make that case in the book. Had they looked, they would have seen they would have been at least suspicious enough to walk 15 yards into the backyard and open the door. That's not a whole lot of probable cause there. That's kind of common sense. The evidence was there. The reason they didn't was that they were taking the grandmother to the house to get her off their back. That's on the record. They were trying to shut her up. She was harassing them with these stories. So the way to deal with it was take her out there and show them there's no problem, you know? And that's why they didn't do something real big. Even though the car is in the driveway, there's a sawed-off weapon, there's a sawed-off barrel sitting there, there's blood on the doors, there's shells everywhere. They didn't bother to look. Charlie takes off, he stops 2 or 3 places on the way out of town, ends up in Bennett, going to his friend's house, farmhouse, and ends up shooting him in the back. His car gets stuck, and he goes up to August Meyer's house, where he's hunted before many times, he and Carol have, and blows the back of August's heads off. And if Carol wasn't there at her house when Charlie murdered the family, that was the first time she saw what he was, who he was, that she saw that he would kill somebody, particularly a friend. So it's in the dark, cold, they're out in the farm country at the end of a lane. August Meyer's walking into the house to get a jacket to help Charlie, and Charlie steps up and blows his head off. Carol sees that, okay? They then eventually leave there. Right about that time, they find the bodies in Belmont. Not due to the police work at all. Charlie's older brother Rodney and a friend, Robert Von Bush, go back there and they decide to look in the shed in the toilet. And there they find the bodies. That's about 4:30 in the afternoon, just about the time August Meyer got killed in Bennett. So after August Meyer, the car gets stuck again. Then the 2 unfortunate teenagers from Bennett drive by, pick them up, and Charlie shoots both of them to death in the cellar, back on the lane to Meyer's house. He later claims Carol shot and killed Carol King, but there's nothing to back that up. And so now she's been exposed to 3 murders. Now she doesn't see him shoot Bobby Jensen and Carol King, but she hears it and knows what he's done, and he basically admits it to her. They're gone, and she knew it was going to happen. They then go back to Lincoln that night. They spend the night on Woodsdale, get up in the morning and hit the Ward's house. That day, they find August Meyer's body and the Bennett Bobby and Carol's bodies in Bennett. Now, people are worried. You know, the 3 people killed in Belmont, that's Belmont, and who knows what happened. That's pretty bad, it's pretty scary. Now they found the killers are still in the area and they've killed 3 more people as far as anybody can tell randomly. Now the fear starts cranking up. And the press is handling it with mild hysteria. It's starting to pick up national interest now because pictures of Charlie are out. He's got this James Dean look with a cigarette. I'm sure you've seen it up there. And Carol's young, cute, and it's kind of a Bonnie and Clyde thing. It's starting to pick it up, and the fear is no one knows where he is. They thought he was still in Lincoln, and he's in Bennett. They go to Bennett, and they find the bodies there the next day, and they think he's then gone west. He's back in Lincoln, killing the wards, which is what they do Wednesday morning, Tuesday morning. It takes them all day basically to get it done, and then they leave that night, Tuesday night. And by that time, they found the bodies in Bennett, and the hysteria has started. They take off for Wyoming. Now the cops are convinced that he's still in Lincoln, right? There's at least 1 crime scene behind every step of the way, and sometimes 2. The ward killing is discovered about 11:30 Wednesday morning. That sets off the stories you hear now about parents going to the school with their rifles and getting their kids out, the snipers on the buildings, the National Guard down patrolling the streets, cars full of vigilantes roaming the neighborhoods looking for redheads. That started when the news of the 3 ward murders, Lauer Ward, his wife Clara, and the maid Lillian Bensel, were found about 11:30. That set off a type of fear and hysteria which was brand new in our culture for a lot of reasons. One was no one ever saw him. All this time, all these killings, no one ever set eyes on him. It was like some sort of a mystic devil. And they couldn't ever catch up with him, and he was killing randomly. So the wards, particularly because they're wealthy, they're eminent, they're respected, they're a popular, well-liked family. If he can murder the wards, he could kill anybody. He probably is going to kill anybody. He could be in our garage. So that only lasted for about 4 hours until they caught him in Wyoming. So that period of fear, it seems to some people that it went on for all 8 days. It went gradually like this, and then peaked when the ward's bodies were found. And then it was irrational, to say the best. I mean, people weren't thinking straight at all about where he was and what he was doing. And it spread into Iowa, it spread into South Dakota, it spread into Kansas, it spread into Colorado. I've talked to people who were young at that time, experienced it, it was all over Nebraska. I mean, it was up in the Sandhills where I was, it was in Scotts Bluff, it was every town. Charlie could be here. He was in Bennett, and then he was in Lincoln. He could be right here. He could be inside the Dairy Queen. So that period of fear, until they caught him, and the word came out, he was captured in Douglas. I won't go into that scene. It's quite a old Western shootout scene, which you probably know the facts of. Once that happened and they were safe, then you've got this kind of post-traumatic stress disorder. You were filled with fear, you were scared, you weren't even angry because you were too scared, and now it's over, but you still have all of this in your system. Not only the individuals, but the culture itself, Lincoln itself. By this time, Lincoln was national news. Lincoln was on Huntley Brinkley every night for 5 nights. I've seen the tapes. And they're feeding into it. And they're picking up feeds from the local stations here. They just learned how to do this, where Huntley could talk to the local reporter and get him on camera. And that happened every night. So you had this ongoing, where are they? Who died today? Where did they think he is going? Which fed into the fear and hysteria in this town and around the state. And was instrumental in making it into a national trauma. Charlie confessed to everything, right? 4 times orally to various cops, in writing that night, in writings to his parents, writings to the cops himself. I killed everybody. Carol didn't do a thing. Carol, in fact, thought that she's maintaining the hostage thing. And she would always say that she was not totally aware that her parents were dead. She thought she was going to be seen as a victim. They start to focus on Carol so that happened on Wednesday. Thursday, the DA does an incredible job of getting an extradition of both of them in like 12 hours. It's amazing. He was determined to get him back here and prosecute him here because he killed traveling salesmen in Wyoming, so they had jurisdiction over him too. They could have kept him there and tried him. And Nebraska really wanted him back to pay for the price here. And the governor went along with it and let him go. So they got him back. By this time, Charlie's story starts to change a little bit. In the press, you see it's Charlie and Carol, Charlie and Carol. They're linking both of them as killers in their description of what happened. Floyd Calver, remember Floyd Calver? He was doing this local TV affiliate, and he called Carol Charlie's accomplice. Just like that, convicted her as if he had some evidence. That's as bad as I ever saw. A lot of them said Charlie and Carol, Charlie and his companion, Charlie and his sidekick, all that sort of stuff. But this overt accusation that she was accomplice came from a local TV station. So Charlie, he's pretty happy. I mean, he's got what he's wanted. I won't go into his psychology, that's in the book, but what's happened, him being captured after a shootout with the cops, and he sees the death penalty coming. That's great. He didn't particularly care to live anyway. He was ready to die, and this was a more dramatic way than he had wanted, which was to die in a shootout with the cops. The only problem was that Carol wasn't there with him. In his fantasy, Carol had to be, quote, on his lap, right? But he admits it all, and then he starts changing his story a month later and starts implicating Carol in a bunch of the killings. He is tried for, his lawyers put up insanity defense. He resisted, but they do it anyway. And they have 6 psychiatrists testify. It's a foregone conclusion that he's going to be convicted and that he's going to die. I mean, there's no way Charlie's going to walk out of that courtroom with a life sentence. That's another part of the time that we were living in back there. He was going to pay, not only for killing them overtly, but for the pain and trauma that he caused that whole culture. He was going to pay for it. There was a little bit of vengeance in there, along with justice. And so he's tried in March. He's convicted. He is executed 15 months later. There's a legal reason why it didn't take the 20 years it takes today, which we can go into if you want to, but it was rapid. And he did resist it, but it was he filed appeals and so forth, but it was kind of just for show, just to keep his parents happy. Carol, on the other hand, her lawyer, Jim's dad, raised the defense or tried to get her tried as a juvenile. She was filed on for murder. They both were filed for murder and felony murder of the boy in the Bennett thing, Bobby Jensen. The felony murder charge against Carol was the one that stuck. And that murder was based on the fact that while they were driving in the car back to the Meyer farm, Charlie asked the boy, Bobby Jensen, to turn the wallet over her. She took the bills out of there and gave them to Charlie. That's the felony. And then the murder happened, so she's guilty of the murder as if she had murdered herself. It's a very bizarre rule. It's been changed somewhat by the Supreme Court in the last several years. So Charlie was convicted both of the murder of Bobby Jensen and felony murder. Carol was convicted of the felony murder, not the actual murder. She was not charged with any of the other murders. The evidence of the murders was allowed into court. She, in fact, was tried, in my view, of every murder that happened and convicted because the evidence came in allowed them. Why was the evidence in there if they weren't charging her with it? Yeah, I mean, I'm saying that's the way the jury would respond to it. Every murder, all 10 murders, were introduced into evidence in Carol's trial, including some really terrible, terrible pictures of what happened in one of the Bennett murders, which I won't go into, completely prejudiced the jury. One of the things that Charlie did admit to that the Lincoln cops still weren't on to him. He admitted to killing the Colbert boy out at the gas station on Cornhusker Highway. They weren't even looking at him for that, even when they had him. They didn't say, maybe, he killed Robert Colbert out on the Cornhusker Highway at the Crest gas station. So he tells them. So now they had that. Now we got 11 total. She's not charged with that, and he's not charged with that. So, but what they have is, like I say, Charlie was a foregone conclusion. She was a foregone conclusion. In my mind, she was going to be convicted. The times and the emotion and the fear and the fact that this hostage defense was a little shaky on his face and the overwhelming belief in her guilt, to me, meant she was going to be convicted one way or another. And I've seen a discussion between the district attorneys who were prosecuting her, saying basically, if we don't get her on this one, we're going to try her for killing Carole King. If we don't get her on that one, we're going to try her for getting Clara Ward. If we don't try her for that one, we're going to try her for getting the maid. Not A, B, C, D, E, but if you read it, they're going to go one after another until she goes down. So in a way, she was fortunate that she went down on the first one, because the felony murder is probably the least egregious one in terms of her participation. She just took the money out. The other ones would have had her acting in very, very terrible fashion. So John MacArthur tries to get her moved to juvenile court, where she could have been only incarcerated until she was 21. That delays her trial until November, which is very unfortunate for her because she's been placed in a mental hospital, of course, because they don't have jails for girls. So they place her in a mental hospital where she sits for 8 months, no treatment at all. Her family's now dead. Her sister's still alive. She's all by herself. She's now 14. And the press in this time period and during Charlie's trial continued to present her as guilty. It seals the deal, this 8-month period in there, because it just continues this hammering, Every time it comes up, it's mainly by implication, but it's so clear, it's so obvious that they believe it. There's one woman who doesn't believe it. She writes a book called Carol, along with 2 other authors, Annette Beaver. But by and large, all the press, all the law enforcement, and the average citizen in Lincoln believes Carol's guilty of murder. So, where's the evidence? Why do you believe this? Charlie, you can't believe anything Charlie says, okay? You cannot believe anything he says. He gave like 9 different stories about what Carol did. Nobody in their right mind would take his word for anything. As a matter of fact, you should have gotten an instruction from the judge saying you cannot believe Charles Starkweather because he's changed his story on who killed Merle Carlson 8 times. Didn't come down to that, but it should have. So what do you have left on Carol? No forensics, no fingerprints, no nothing like that. You have her statement, right? The statement that was taken of a 14-year-old girl without a lawyer, without a parent, without an adult, over 7.5 hours, or 8 hours, kind of depends, of interrogation by different law enforcement officers on 2 consecutive days, getting her to say things, putting words in her mouth, refusing to get her a lawyer when she asked for one, and setting her up to answer certain ways by talking to her beforehand. You can tell it's happened. And she makes some statements in there that are damning her, such as she could have left and didn't. Those instances I talked about where she could have gotten away, she admits to those. She doesn't admit to any killing. She admits to taking the money out of the wallet. She admits to the crime she was convicted of. That statement today should not have gotten in. It just should not have. It went up to the U.S. Supreme Court. The issue then was it voluntary or not? There's no way you can say 6 law enforcement officers in a room with a 14-year-old girl all by herself. What she says is a voluntary statement? No, I'm sorry. Today, it would be excluded under Miranda because she wasn't given the warnings. So, where's the evidence? No evidence. The one thing that is critical in my analysis of it is bringing the whole area of trauma psychology. We know today most people in one version or another of it, PTSD, dissociation, repressed memories, multiple personalities, the effects of childhood trauma on people as they grow up, whether it started with World War II and shock. Then it was kind of dropped, and then in the 60s it caught on mainly through feminists dealing with rape victims or delayed the battered women syndrome, where they would get battered on Monday and kill the husband on Thursday. And they're starting to lay out, here's the way these trauma work. It doesn't have to explode like that. So all this, when you apply this theory to Carol, and I won't go into it unless there are questions on it, she comes up pretty clearly as a victim, in my view. If she, first of all, with the childhood that she had, sets up a personality that was very likely to be destructive. It's interesting that it wasn't. Carol, by the way, served 17 years at York. Women's Reformatory, I guess it is. She was released in 1976. And Jim MacArthur handled that parole hearing, as well as the earlier ones, which weren't granted. She went from there. While she was there, she had a spotless record, as going to the book, no problems, 17 years, no issues, no rule breaking, nothing. She's going around Nebraska giving talks to Sertoma and Lions clubs and kids clubs about stay away from bad people, be careful who you befriend, and so forth. And she's out. She gets a job as a medical assistant in Lansing, Michigan Hospital. She works there for 23 years. Gets a pension. Leads, as far as I can tell, a normal life. She went down to Mexico, traveled with some friends on spring break, and marched in parades and read books and got married. Husband died in a car accident, and she had a stroke, and she's been in nursing home for the last probably 6 or 7 years. She's not in very good shape now, but the point is, how do you go on a rampage and see your sister, who you love more than anything, and your mother murdered, and then go and participate with somebody in 7 more murders, and then stop it and become the normal person who lives a normal life? That's just psychological logic. There's no explanation for that sort of behavior change or unchange. So the trauma psychology is brand new in terms of applying it to her. It's interesting the way it's been received by other psychologists and by mental health people. I think it's an interesting contribution of the book. The impact. TV had just hit big. 85% of the people the country now had television in 1958. So you had an unholy alliance of television and violence started with Charles Startweather. This is the first one, where it came into your living room. I mean, you used to be able to just see Charlie's picture in the paper or hear the radio talk about him. Now, he could be in your living room as he's leaving the courtroom, walking with two deputies to his car. You could see him. You could see Carol as she was taken from the prison down to the courthouse. And every time it's repeated. The pictures are incredibly powerful. And this is the first instance where it was realized how powerful they were in general, and particularly with violence in particular, that it had a power that was seductive to the public, to the average. This was now violence in the public forum, you know, out in the street, out where the world could see it. And that, what you see now, what you saw initially was a romanticization of Charlie and Carol, like Bonnie and Clyde. And that started with the movie Badlands. Martin Sheen played Charlie, and Sissy Spacek played Carol. It's the director, Terry Malick, himself called it a fairy tale. It does not give you the feeling of trauma and violence and suffering that those two people caused. And the other part of it is there, you know, Charlie went out kind of laughing and snickering and waving his hand at people. So where's that? And here's his girlfriend. She's still in prison. And that kind of adds to the whole pull of the story. It starts to gain traction with that movie, and then Natural Born Killers was based on it. Bruce Springsteen's song that came out in 1981 called Nebraska. The album's called Nebraska. Further romanticizes it. If you listen to that song, it's very haunting. It's probably one of the most haunting songs I've ever heard. And I don't want to say you feel sympathy for Charlie, but you feel something for him. You feel his humanity, is what it is, and his suffering, which I'm not particularly comfortable feeling it. But that became so popular. Of course, Charlie, there's this line about, I wouldn't mind going to the chair as long as Carol's on my lap, sitting on my lap, which I determined he said. There were a bunch of other people saying his lawyer said it, or his dad said it. I looked into it and determined that, in fact, Charlie said it to a reporter. Springsteen takes it and says, I don't mind going to the chair as long as my pretty baby is sitting on my lap. That's, again, the romantic spin on it. Pretty baby, that's a catchy little phrase, not just Carol. So that, it kept getting this kind of romantic take on it. And books came out on it which weren't particularly in-depth on the issue of like Carol's guilt. They were mainly kind of assumed or passed over, so that made it easier. Stephen King his mother said his bedroom was plastered, all the walls were plastered with pictures of Charlie and Carol and articles on the story. He says it himself. I don't read a lot of Stephen King, but I know in several books he mentioned Starkweather, so it kind of set up Stephen King. So, let's see. Starkweather, Charlie and Carol, however you want to say it, will always be a part of the American crime story. It will be a critical part of it, a fundamental part of it. I said, if you want to understand where we got today with mass murders, start with Charlie, because it was the first one where there were random killings. He wasn't mad at people when he killed them. Charles Whitman up in the tower at Austin, Texas, when he shot 21 people to death, he didn't know who they were. He wasn't mad at them. They were doing it for their own particular pathology. Speck murdered 8 nurses. He didn't know them. he was never angry. I mean, he never acted angry. He didn't mutilate himself. So this whole new trail, this whole new pathology of murdering for the sake of murdering people you don't even know, people you're not mad at, that starts with Charlie. And it kicks in, and you can track it, starting with Whitman and then Speck and the Boston Strangler and all those people. Some of the serial killers know, but the mass murderers, by and large, do not know who they're killing. They're not taking it out on a particular individual. Charlie taught him that. To me, he said, look, all you guys, all you sociopaths in your basement, they're plotting all this stuff against your mother. You're going to poison her or whatever. Don't be disabled by your anger. Go out into the world and act it out. You'll feel better and you'll be famous. That's the lesson. That's the door that Charlie opened for mass murder. Serial killers are a little bit different story, but and that's the way I see it. I wanted to mention one last thing. What's new in the book? There's a lot of new stuff in the book, but the one I want to focus on is the one that I believe had the cops asked the right questions, 10 people would have lived. Carol would never have been convicted of anything. She would have finished school. Mike Ward would have finished his year at Choate School, and everybody would have lived a normal life. Charlie, when he got kicked out of his apartment for not paying rent, went to the Crest gas station on Cornhusker Boulevard, right? And he would sleep there. And he got to know Robert McClung, who, over a 7-month period, they kind of talked. Robert McClung never learned his name. He knew his car, he knew his story, and he talked to him. Charlie would come in and read comic books, talk him out of a pack of cigarettes, and go to sleep in his car. And he told Robert McClung, wake me up at 4:30 because I have to go get on my brother's garbage truck and pick up garbage in Lincoln. So he did it. He woke him up at 4:30. Every morning he was there so he could get to his brother's garbage truck. The cops that are investigating the case talked to McClung, talked to another lieutenant who was there at the same time, not the same nights, but the same, had the same encounters with Charlie. And they tell me, there's this kid, he's in a 49 Ford, and he's got this thick, fiery red hair, and he sleeps out here a lot, and didn't ring any bells. Had they asked, do you know where he works? They would have said he's a garbage man. Go back and look at the garbage companies in existence in 1958 in Lincoln. There are 3 of them. 5 minutes per garbage company, right? You got a guy there with flaming red hair, drives 49 Ford, works on his brother Rodney's truck? No. Yeah. He'd have been gone by noon. I guarantee you. Noon. Not only that, Robert McClung knew where he used to work. He used to work at Western Newspaper Union. It was where they boxed and stacked and tied up newspaper packages to be delivered. And he worked there for about a couple of years. Called up Western Newspaper Union. You got a guy who worked there. Now, they would have had his address and his phone number and everything. And they didn't ask that question. The thing that's really, really annoying about it is that the guy who came in to clean up the Denver Police Department's mess, failing to spot the evidence out of the house and in failing to follow up on it with McClung. Robinson was a big independent, FBI agent, former FBI agent from California, came in to write a report to let the police department off the hook. And he blamed Robert McClung for not offering. I know where he worked. That infuriated me almost as much as failing to ask the question himself. But it's a horrible thing to think of. That if it had been followed with that question, all these people would have lived and all the suffering would have happened. In terms of what happened when the police went to the house and didn't see the evidence, had they seen it, they would have known then it was Charlie and Carol with them. Charlie was gone with Carol in Charlie's car. Whether they would have figured it out and caught him before he got to August Meyer's house, it's not at all clear. But they would have found it at 11:30. They would have seen what he had done. And he didn't kill August Meyer until 4:30, and he was in Lincoln for most of that time and out on the highway to Bennett. He would have come across a lot of cops who were on the alert for him. And so there's a reasonable possibility that they could have caught him before he got to August Meyer's house. Okay, so I'm going to... There was plenty of other evidence. If they had Charlie, there was other ways they could have tied him in, not just the fact that he, the evidence of his job. I want to ask my partner in crime, who I dedicate the book to come up and we're reading. This is after this is after Starkweather gets the death penalty. And it's my first paragraph. By the way, little aside, the execution scene was my favorite scene. I wanted you in that execution room, and I hope I got you in there. One single light bulb hanging down like that over this chair. This guy comes in, there's this opiate chair. Now he's got a shaved head, right? He has a tiny little storeroom. You can feel it, right? And anyway, I got a sick sort of pleasure out of writing that, not only to see Charlie die, but to make you feel it too. Okay, enough of that. There we go.
Okay. Hello, Lincoln. Charles Startweather was going to die in the electric chair. It didn't undo the trauma, but at least it showed that Lincoln knew what needed to be done. Whether you called it revenge or justice or something else, there was a remain business, of course. Lincoln would overwhelmingly agree with Warren King, Carole King's brother, when he said that, from the family's perspective, the story was far from over.